With the website updated and the minigame now finished, it's now time to start thinking about what's next. So when the game launches, what would you like to see next? Are you ready to join the discussion? Let's do this! Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Hollywood here with another Godforge video. On today's video, we're going to be discussing what we would like to see for future champions added to the game, as well as, someday down the road, future factions as well added to the game. So to start off the video discussion, I'm going to start off by discussing which future factions we would like to see someday down the road when they add a 10th or 11th or 12th faction to Godforge. Now, the very first one I'm going to discuss here is going to be controversial, and probably pretty controversial given a lot of the stuff that's going on in the world nowadays with the conflicts in various parts of the world. The very first faction I'm going to discuss is one that has a biblical background. So for factions, I think a biblical style faction could be called something like the Ketuvim Faction, which is a Hebrew word for writings. Now, obviously this does seem probably a little bit controversial, but there are numerous figures from biblical history and historical history that could fit into a faction of this nature. So other factions that we could talk about in this video here, and I have a bunch of them listed. The next one here would be the Roman faction, or just simply Rome. Now, we have Greek mythology already in the game, in the Olympus faction, but we could have a Rome faction as well, given Rome historical heroes and the Roman Empire era, and Roman mythology is slightly different from Greek mythology, so we could have some variants there, and some other gods and goddesses I've noticed also that are sort of more distinct to Roman mythology than Greek mythology. So there's an option to have another faction there called the Roman faction, or simply Rome. Other factions that we could have down the road are factions like an Americana faction based around North American history, Native American history, urban legend, that sort of thing. We could have a faction called the Neverland Faction, which is based on fairy tales and different creative writing from history as well. Stuff that doesn't fit into our current mythologies and current factions in the game. So we could have the Neverland Faction, and we also could have a Wanderers Faction for urban legends and other things that just don't fit into our current factions. Another faction that I heard someone discussing on Discord would be something like a Atlantean faction where you could have mermaids and other things. I'm not sure if there's that much Atlantean legend or lore, but there perhaps is, so that's something to consider down the road as well. Maybe something like a water faction or an Atlantean faction could fit into other categories that we have currently. Something like the Sirens that could fit into the Olympus faction. Also further down the road, if Godforge wants to get into IPs, we could have something like the Hollywood faction or the Tinseltown faction, or simply just call it Tinsel, if you want to get into certain different IPs. And anyone here can feel free to join the discussion, so if you have any ideas which IPs you would like to see added to Godforge, just write them down in the comments below. It's not a comprehensive or exhaustive or complete list, and it's that way on purpose because I'd like to see some audience participation here for you guys to write down below in the comments who you would like to see added to the game, from legend, mythology, and lore, perhaps fairy tales. We also could have a faction called the Frontier Faction, which would be a faction, again, like Native American faction, or you could have people from history such as Christopher Columbus or Alexander Mackenzie or any other explorer that you could have there. So a Frontier Faction could be another faction that could be added to the game. So moving on to discuss now the most controversial faction in this video today. I would say it's a little bit controversial because it includes some historical and modern day religious figures, but they are also historical figures too, and I think they're very interesting. So I think we could add a faction of this sort without being controversial and without adding offense to anyone from any modern day religion. So here are some of my ideas for a biblical or Ketuvim type faction. So I think we could have, the first three I got listed here are sort of boss type figures, or maybe Pantheon boss type figures. The four horsemen of the apocalypse, I think that could make an interesting style encounter or boss. Leviathan, which is a biblical but also mythological figure as well. Tiamat, which is a historical god type figure in many of the mythologies and many of the other writings from history. So Tiamat would be an interesting one to add to the game. So I think if we have historical figures like pharaohs in the game and figures like Ramses, we could also easily have a historical figure like Moses in the game, or a figure like Noah. We could have Adam and Eve in the game, and Adam and Eve in many capacities has almost a mythological kind of a feel to it anyway. Samson and Delilah are some pretty interesting figures from history, and I think those could be added to the game. David and Goliath, Elijah. If you get into some figures from history that have been given sainthood, like Joan of Arc, I think Joan of Arc is actually one of my favorite saints from history. I actually have a screenplay. My last screenplay was a television pilot that I wrote, and the main character is kind of a teenage monster, vampire, spirit kind of demon slayer, sort of in the realm of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And one of his companions in that script is Joan of Arc, who appears to him in apparitions and visions. So she's always been a favorite of mine from history. And if we're talking saints from history, we could also put like Saint Christopher in there. And if we're talking holiday saints, obviously we have Saint Nick for Christmas, Saint Patrick for Saint Patrick's Day, which is actually today as I'm recording this video. We also have Saint Valentine, who is the inspiration for Valentine's Day. If we're moving on to biblical type figures like archangels, angels, and Nephilim, we could have characters in the game like Azazel or Gabriel. And if we're moving on to some sort of generic terms like rares, uncommons, that sort of thing in the game, we could have things added like Knight Templar or Crusader. And then we have obviously some wise men figures from biblical history. We have Balthazar, Melchior, Casper, and Nicodemus. So if we're talking about some faction that is like a biblical faction or a Ketuvim faction, I think those are some interesting figures from history that we could add to the game, and I don't think they would be too controversial or cause offense to people. I think those are interesting characters from history, and I think that could make an interesting addition to the game. So now moving on to, like I said, with a historical faction or a Roman faction. If we have a figure like Cleopatra in the game, who is currently in the game already, we certainly could have figures like Mark Antony or Julius Caesar in the game. And if we have Julius Caesar in the game, then we could also have characters like Brutus, Octavia, Caligula, Nero, Marcus Aurelius, Commodus, Spartacus. Also, we could add Roman-inspired heroes from literature. We could have characters like Ben-Hur, based on the 1880 novel, which is now public domain. So we could definitely have Ben-Hur in the game and all the associated characters with that novel. We could also have Maximus, who was the gladiator figure from the Gladiator movie, and that could be an IP tie-in. If the game wanted to go in the direction of adding IP tie-ins, we could add Maximus to the game. We could also add other historical figures from history, historical figures such as Rasputin, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, Nostradamus, King Shaka Zulu. We could have Alexander the Great, Sun Tzu, and then we could have, for commons and rares, etc., we could have figures like Centurion, Shogun, Samurai, Ninja, and Sumo. We could add those to the game as well. Adding on to what we already have in the Olympus faction, Greek mythology, or if we add some Roman mythology to the game, we could add heroes like Perseus, Andromeda, the Stygian witches, Calibus, Pegasus. Now these are characters from the movie Clash of the Titans in 1981. The 1981 Clash of the Titans movie was one of the favorite movies of mine when I was a kid. I always had that on my VCR. So having characters like Perseus, Andromeda, Calibus, etc., I think those would be awesome additions to the game. And I think it would be cool to have like a Clash of the Titans theme at some point and add those characters to the game all at once. So I think that would be a really fun event to do. We could add Neptune or Poseidon, Hera, Thetis. If we add a future Pantheon boss down the road, which we probably will, we could have an Olympus themed Pantheon boss called the Kraken, and I think having a Pantheon boss called the Kraken would be very on point for a game like this, and I think it would be very cool to have a Pantheon boss called the Kraken, so I hope we get to have one of those at some point. We could have Charon, the skeleton boatman from the River Styx, Cerberus, Jason and the Argonauts. We could have sirens or mermaids in the game. We could have Bellona added to the game. Now, Bellona seems to be more associated with Roman mythology than Greek mythology. Bellona is the goddess of war. I also think Bellona was one of the inspirations for Bellona on Star Trek Voyager back in the day, the Klingon engineer. So Bellona would be interesting to add to the game. We could add constellation figures to the game, like Gemini or Castor and Pollux, Romulus and Remus. Could add Atlas, Hermes, Griffin, Typhon, Abraxas, Gorgon, and Agamemnon. So those are Roman and Greek mythology kind of figures we could add to the game down the road. Now with the Aaru, we could have more obviously Egyptian mythology figures added to the game, and there's plenty of them, so we could have tons of those. Just a few of those are Egyptian mythological figures like Khonsu, Horus, Ammit, Tauret, Hathor, Akhenaten. We could fit otherworldly lore into this game as well. We could add figures from the Anunnaki gods, the Watchers, which are also biblical, Cthulhu. So moving on to a more public domain and writings faction here, IP, etc. We could have a faction like Neverland or a Wonderland type faction. And this is where we get into some more old writings, public domain, etc. We could have figures like Frankenstein, maybe for Halloween, Wolfman, Captain Ahab, Hansel and Gretel, Rumpelstiltskin, Peter Pan and Wendy, Captain Hook, Gulliver from Gulliver's Travels, Beauty and the Beast, Phantom of the Opera, which is now public domain, Alice in Wonderland, Zorro, The Lone Ranger, Tonto, Tarzan, Aladdin, Alibaba, Quasimodo, Esmeralda. We could have figures from literature like Count of Monte Cristo, Sherlock Holmes, Moriarty, Watson, The Three Musketeers, Robin Hood, Little John, Maid Marian. I've seen images for Merlin and Lancelot, so we could also put Merlin and Lancelot in there. Obviously, they're from the Avalon faction. So we could have more Knights of the Round Table in the game, certainly. Uther would be another character from the Avalon faction we could add at some point. We could add other fairy tale type themed ideas. We could add Ariel from The Little Mermaid, The Last Unicorn, Snow White. We could have a generic Ice Queen character, and it would be kind of cool to have like an Ice Queen boss. So I think that would be kind of a generic hero or villain from literature that we could add to the game. Cinderella, Fairy Godmother. If you have a Fairy Godmother, you're also probably going to want to have Prince Charming, Rapunzel. The Wizard of Oz, the novel The Wizard of Oz, is also public domain now, so you could also have characters from The Wizard of Oz in the game. The Jungle Book. Moving along now to Urban Legends, and I'm not sure what kind of faction name would be good for Urban Legend. Maybe you could just have it called Legends Faction. You have Urban Legends like the Chupacabra, Loch Ness, Leprechaun, Ogopogo, Bigfoot, Bandersnatch, Changeling, Doppelganger, Boogeyman, the Sasquatch or the Abominable Snowman, Bloody Mary, and the Mothman. So you could have all kinds of urban legends like that added to the game, and there are tons of urban legends, and there is, if you go on Wikipedia and just look up urban legends, there's a ton of them. If you have an Americana faction or a North America faction or a History of America faction, you could have historical figures from Native American and Western history. You could have characters added to the game like Billy the Kid, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Buffalo Bill, Paul Bunyan, Mark Twain, 12-Foot Davis, Crazy Horse, Geronimo, Sitting Bull, and Tecumseh. And there's many more that you could add to the game as well, but you could have so many figures from North American and Western history added to the game. So I noted that you could have a Hollywood or Tinsel type faction for Tinseltown. This would be for your IP and collaboration events, and there's many of them that you could have if you would like to, and I think there's lots of tie-ins that you could add to Godforge. So some of those interesting collaboration and IP events that you could have in Godforge would be stuff like Constantine from the Constantine movie and comics, Selene from Underworld, Blade and the Night Stalkers, Moon Knight, Game of Thrones, Chronicles of Narnia, Watchmen, The Dark Crystal, Final Fantasy, and maybe specifically Final Fantasy XIV, which has some pretty awesome characters, Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold, Lord of the Rings, Sailor Moon, Mortal Kombat, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Witcher, Jack Sparrow and Pirates of the Caribbean, James Bond, Highlander, Xena and Gabrielle, Hellboy, and a movie like Krull, which was one of my favorite movies as a kid. They have a lot of interesting characters. If we do any holiday events like Halloween and Christmas, we could put in characters like Freddy and Jason, Ghostface, Pinhead, Michael Myers, the Invisible Man, the Headless Horseman, and Ichabod Crane, Wednesday from the Addams Family, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Elvira. For Christmas, we could have figures like Jack Frost, Frosty the Snowman, Kris Kringle, Krampus, and Saint Nick. So these are just some of the ideas and some of the interesting ideas that I have for adding extra heroes and factions to the game at some point down the road. What kind of ideas do you have? And what kind of heroes and myths and legends and IPs would you like added to the game someday down the road? Add some comments down below who you would like to see added to the game in the future. It would be really cool to see some of our favorite ideas added to the game in the future down the road. So for everyone who is just discovering this channel for the first time, hopefully you've had some fun with this video today. Feel free to add a like and subscribe to this video if you've gotten something from this video today and had a good time. I hope you're all doing well and everyone's very excited about this game coming out real soon, and I can't wait either. So I hope to see you all down the road again for my future videos here. Thank you all for stopping by the channel today, and I hope you've had some fun with the video today. And until next time, take care everyone.